Welcome. The topic we will be discussing in this lecture is mobile ad hoc networks. Actually, if you see the standard mobile IP, it needs an infrastructure. It needs entities like home agent, foreign agent in the fixed network, and also mobile stations. Sorry, not mobile station, base station, BSS. Such fixed infrastructure is required. For example, tower is a fixed infrastructure from where the mobile signals are received and two mobiles are able to connect. Okay, so so and domain naming services, routing, etc. All these are not designed for mobility. Actually, they are designed for fixed networks, and these are adopted by mobile IP. Okay. So the point here is, even though the mobile communication, the end devices are mobile, but the infrastructure is not mobile. The infrastructure is a fixed infrastructure. The mobile communication or the cellular communication depends on the fixed infrastructure. Through the fixed infrastructure only the communication happens. But at some times there is no infrastructure. But at some times we want to communicate when there is no infrastructure. Example, sometimes you may need a instant infrastructure because of some unplanned meetings or, or spontaneous interpersonal communication. For these things, there may not be any infrastructure because infrastructure need to be planned and it should be administered. Okay, and it would also take some time to set up the infrastructure. Therefore, there are instances at which ad hoc connectivity is required. Ad hoc connectivity through mobile devices is required. Okay? Or let us consider disaster relief. If when there is any disaster like earthquake or flood, in such cases, first the first the infrastructure or the fixed networks will collapse. Okay, for example, hurricanes may cut the phone and power lines, floods may destroy the base station, fires may burn the servers. Okay, so emergency team they may build the infrastructure but only for their communication. It cannot be used for general public communication. So in such cases, no forward planning can be done, and setup must be extremely fast and reliable. Okay, the same applies to the military activities also. Okay, so in military activities also, you cannot depend on an infrastructure based network because the enemies may collapse the infrastructure at any time. So we need some networks which is not depending on any infrastructure. Such networks are called as ad hoc networks. Okay, so we'll have a brief about this. And also sometimes we may want to communicate with remote areas. There may not be any fixed infrastructure. So where the population is sparse, there all in such cases also communication is possible only through ad hoc networks. Okay, or at some other places, uh, depending on the type of service, depending on the type of service, the service which is based on fixed network may be too costly. For example, sometimes uh, uh, for example, an application may send only a small status information every other minute. Okay, in that case, an ad hoc network would be preferred rather than a cellular network, which is a connection oriented network. Okay, so because of these reasons, there are a lot of interest on ad hoc network. Okay, in ad hoc network, there will not be any default router or anything like that. Every node will act as a router. Every node will act as a router. Okay, there is no base station which controls other nodes. No, temporarily some node will act as a base station and it will coordinate. When it leaves that particular network, again some other node will act as the coordinator or base station, and then it will coordinate the things. So such networks are called as ad hoc networks, which does not which does not depends on any fixed infrastructure. Okay, so these are, so ad hoc networks are networks without any infrastructure. That is, they do not have any fixed infrastructure. So here you can see three devices are connecting. There is a laptop and PDA or an iPad and mobile phones. And this communication does not depend on any fixed infrastructures like base station. No, these are not there. Okay, so there is no involvement of any fixed infrastructures like base station. So that is the beauty of ad hoc networks. Okay, so so some of the examples for ad hoc networks are nowadays we have Bluetooth where up to 8 devices can be connected, or a tablets in a room can be connected, or some gaming devices can be connected. But even though these are some small examples for ad hoc networks, but the coverage of these devices is very less. You cannot use these devices like mobile phones. If somebody is 10 kilometers away or 100 kilometers away, or in another city, in that case we cannot use Bluetooth. Okay, so there is where the ad hoc networks comes. So ad hoc networks are the one which tries to provide all the services that are provided by the typical cellular network but without infrastructure. Okay, so here you can see car to car network is an example of ad hoc network. So different cars in a traffic can communicate with each other, and they can share some crucial data about the road conditions, traffic, all those things. Okay, so these ad hoc networks is there is a special task force is established by IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, and that is focusing on mobile ad hoc network, MANET. Okay, so so this is the brief introduction about why we need an ad hoc network. Okay. So this diagram shows how the how ad hoc networks differs from the normal fixed network. So if you see the mobile devices, for mobile devices all communications were depend on the fixed network, and the fixed network in the sense the backbone. In the backbone there may be a what you call there may be different devices like base station, BSS, MSS, MSC, and public switch telephone networks. So based on that infrastructure only, mobile network or cellular network is working. Okay, but if you see ad hoc network will not have any fixed infrastructure. Ad hoc network will not have any fixed infrastructure. They can directly communicate. They can directly communicate with themselves by through some mobile routers. So there will be routers, but these routers also can move. These are called as mobile routers. Okay, so um, so by that the ad hoc network will be able to communicate with fixed network also. Okay, so so basically this diagram what it shows in the sense, it shows the relationship between MANET to mobile IP. What is the relationship between MANET and mobile IP, and also it shows the relationship between mobile IP and DHCP. And also it shows the relationship between mobile IP and DHCP, that is dynamic host configuration protocol, which provides the COA address for the mobile devices when it moves from one network to another network. Okay, so mobile devices can be connected either directly with an infrastructure using mobile IP, uh, uh, mobile IP support, and DHCP as a source of many parameters such as IP address. Managed Research is responsible for developing protocols and components to enable ad hoc network between mobile devices. So the Managed Research is focusing on developing protocols and components to enable ad hoc networking between mobile devices. Okay. So here we should know that the separation of end system and router is only a logical separation. Typically, mobile nodes in an ad hoc scenario comprise routing and end system functionality. Okay, so that is, it means that the routers. So this is just a logical separation, but in the reality, some of the mobile devices itself will act like a router itself. Okay, some of the mobile devices itself will act like a router. Okay, so the greatest challenge with mobile ad hoc network is the routing issues. How will you perform the routing? Because in case of normal cellular networks, routing is made possible because of the fixed infrastructure. So the fixed infrastructure stores details like HL or VLR. From that the location of the mobile devices can be tracked, and we have COA. With through COA the communication is happening. But if all these things are not there, there is nothing fixed in the sense then how will you route the packet? So that is the greatest challenge. So there is a greatest challenge with respect to routing in mobile ad hoc networks, and lots of research is going on in this area. Okay, so it is not that the routing is limited to only layer 3. In some of the cases, routing may come to layer 2 also. Okay, so for example, if you take Bluetooth, uh, uh, it offers forwarding or routing capabilities in layer 2 based on MAC address for ad hoc networks. Okay. So similarly, there are several other algorithms where routing is taking place at layer 2. Okay. So basically, in this lecture, we are discussing about the need of ad hoc network. Why ad hoc network is required? Ad hoc network is required because the normal cellular network, it depends on the fixed infrastructure. So based on the fixed infrastructure only, always the communication happens. But sometimes you may not have the fixed infrastructure. You may need an instant infrastructure. Or sometimes the fixed infrastructure might have been collapsed due to or sometimes you may be want to communicate in to a remote location where there is no fixed infrastructure. Okay, or take military applications. If the infrastructure is collapsed by the opponent camp, and if the military personnel want to communicate with each other, then they cannot rely on a fixed infrastructure. They need some form of ad hoc communication. Okay, and sometimes the fixed infrastructure communication may be too costly because it uses a connection oriented cellular network. Okay, but sometimes the mobile device may want to send some small update information uh, at every frequent intervals. So in such cases, it is not at all advised to go for fixed network. In that case also we need a mobile network. Okay, so there is a separate group uh, at IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, that is working on mobile ad hoc networks, MANET. Okay. The greatest challenge with the mobile ad hoc network is the routing. Routing is the greatest challenge because how we will route packets when there is no fixed infrastructure. With cellular networks, routing is possible because there is a fixed backbone where the things like VLR, HLR, and also we have HA, FA, COA addresses. With these things, routing is being done in cellular network with the fixed network support. But in a ad hoc mobile ad hoc network, there will not be any fixed infrastructure. So lots of research is going on routing, and routing need not be confined only to layer 3. It may move to layer 2 also. Right? So that's it about mobile ad hoc networks. So let us stop here. Thank you.